What's going on, guys? Welcome to video log number 6. It's been about 2 months since I worked on this engine, basically because 1, I'm engaged now, 2, holiday stuff, and 3, I came home from all of that only to find that my rental unit had rainwater damage along with mold. So ripped the carpet out, and I've been tiling stuff, and it's just that with full-time job, it's really difficult to do something like this. So with that said, I'm actually, even though I've assembled the intake manifold and the fuel rail and all of this really cool looking stuff here, this is basically just a plug that's there so that I don't get any contaminants in. But I'm actually going to take that stuff off of the head again. I know I videoed myself torquing the head down to the block, so it's all good. Cams are all torqued. But for peace of mind, I'm gonna take all the stuff off from around the intake manifold. I'm gonna be talking about that later in the video. So in this video, I'll have everything laid out in the progress bar like I usually do. So you'll be able to jump through to different chapters and different sections of what I'm talking about. But basically, I'm going to be going over first, timing the 2JZ engine, like how to line up the marks, because the VVTi variant, which is what this one is GTE VVTi, you have a lot of play in the intake cam gear. So it ends up causing some complications when you're trying to time the engine if you're not used to the movement of a VVTi gear. So I'm going to go over how to adjust this, how to line the marks up so that when you put the belt on and you tighten it, it's done the first time, the right way, the first time. I deleted my crossover tubes, the little things, the little lines here that go between the intake. So I did that because I'm going to have an air oil separator. So I'm going to talk about how I deleted those and plugged them and everything. So I'm going to talk about that. I had to get those out of the way because of how my coils are very much getting in the way of those crossover tubes. The routing of the fuel lines, and look at that. Factory power steering is still in place. So I'm going to talk about how I made all of that stuff fit and how I'm routing the fuel lines. So it's a 6AN and an 8AN as far as the braided steel goes, but I forget the actual size of the aluminum. I want to say it's Earl's Performance. Whatever aluminum line I went with, it's the same manufacturer made the fittings that made the aluminum line. So that line that's right there that I have laid out beside the car, that was a 10-foot line. I cut off about 1.5 feet to snake that around over the intake manifold and go into the fuel pressure regulator. Fuel pulse damper is also nestled in there. So I'm going to talk about the fuel lines. I'm going to talk about these little mini sub harnesses that I'm going to finish in video log 7, because I'm in video log 7. I'm planning on putting the engine back into the car. So I'm going to pressure wash the engine bay, get that all clean, just set the engine on the mounts in the car just to line up for wires and for like the connections and all that stuff, and get that electrical in place, and I can just do the transmission line later, but the transmission sub harness later for the T56. But while I have the engine out, I'll talk about this more in video log 7, but my pilot bearing that I got from Moe's Supra that goes between the T56 and the 2JZ, that I'm going to use some bread and push that old pilot bearing out, put the new pilot bearing in, and also measure the bell housing run out so that I could see what offset dowels I have to get, if any. Hopefully it's within tolerance and I don't have to. Also going to talk about, so I have titanium studs here holding the exhaust manifold on, but the problem with that is 3 of them are too long and they bump the runners. So I actually bought 3 of these shorter ones. So I'm going to talk about that and then talk about the size difference between these that are the same length as the factory. These are from Speed Factory. They're titanium and they're the burn titanium look. These aren't burn titanium, but you can't really tell where I have them like bolted in underneath. And this is the 3rd one that's going to go underneath this runner. And then whatever else. I know I'm probably going to talk about my brake booster delete and ABS delete. That's the Chase Bays kit. So that's the stuff that I'm planning on talking about in this video. So it's going to be a pretty loaded video, but first of all, timing. With timing the 2JZ, it's a little complicated because of that VVTi gear that I was pointing out earlier. And there's no shortage of people that have tried to change their own timing belt and then they've gotten it off. Now, I'm not going to show me putting my timing belt on because this is really just a video log. I'm not videoing myself doing something. These, when they're arranged top dead center, like the gears themselves, like this, well, this moves, but where it's connected to the shaft, it doesn't move. And if you look inside of this hole, top dead center is going to be when this little notch is all the way up. It's like this notch that's here, that notch that's there. So that's when that is pointed straight up. But you can't see that if you have this in like where you're torquing everything down. So you would align this gear, like this one is easy to align. That little, there's a slash and there's a dot. So the slash is aligned to that notch that's there. I put a little paint pen mark on that. It's kind of rubbed off, but I have a paint pen mark that's on that. And then I put the paint pen mark on this just to make it stand out a little bit more. I did the same thing here, but this one, whenever this is turned all the way to the right, all the way clockwise, it's still not perfectly lined up. It's about half a tooth. This gear is about half a tooth this way. And that's so that I would have a tiny bit of slack whenever I put the belt on this gear first and I start to wrap it around this gear. I'll have that little bit of slack, but that slack, whenever I start rotating the crank in the clockwise direction, this would pull and then this would come taut, and I'll just make sure that these two marks line up with these two marks. The other thing that I'm doing is I have this set about one tooth to the left. Now what that does, it allows me, the 3S GTE was the same way. I basically had to do the exact same thing because the timing tensioner on the 3S GTE, it's right here underneath the water pump. So water pump's on that side. But yeah, the way the 3S GTE is that the timing tensioner is here and it pushes on a similar little bracket that Toyota has there. But this tooth, I have it off about that much so that whenever I actually do turn this a little bit more and I put tension on the belt as it's going around this side, this mark will line up as tension is going between here and here. And then as I'm turning on the wrench, the belt pulls this, it pulls this tight, and then I can look at these three marks and make sure they're all lined up before I put tension on it from loosening up this little pull pin on the tensioner. So it's not difficult to do once you've done it. It's like, oh, okay. Once you understand that this has play in it, so you've got to work with this. But once this is moved all the way to the right, this is just a hair shy of these marks like being lined up so that whenever it's turned this way, this becomes taut. Because if these two are both at perfect top dead center, it's a little difficult to slide the belt into the grooves and to wrap it around. So it's a little easier to do it if you have slack between here and here. Same thing goes between this and this. It's hard to put it on whenever you have that that tension between like if everything's at full top dead center. But if it's like that, then it works really well. So I'm going to be doing that next and setting that with the crossover tubes. So I have them, they're here if you want to. I'm probably going to throw these up on eBay, so if someone wants to buy these, they'll be going up on eBay. They're Toyota OEM, just stapled together, taped together. But one goes, the larger one goes here and the smaller one goes here. So I was trying to arrange I made this bracket myself in the harness, but everything was so compact here. I was realizing that I made it to where the hoses, they would go between the coil packs, but the problem that I would have would be I would have to disconnect these hoses every time, and it's such a tight space in there to disconnect the hoses. I just figured, like, you know what, I'll plug these. And the way that I plugged these, I bought something that's called a spiral flute tap. And it's basically a tap that they're crazy expensive, but they look like DNA strands. It's a tap that's designed to pull out the aluminum shavings as you're tapping into something. So as you're twisting the tap into, in this case, valve covers, I had the valve covers pointed up where I'm tapping into the bottom of it. I just had it turned to that direction. So I'm tapping end of the side of it, of course, but I'm going in the upward direction, so the shavings would still fall down. And I also had to use my drill to drill up, so hopefully the shavings would fall down and not go inside. Also, it benefited me greatly with these being dry with no oil inside of them. So it was very easy just to tap these, but I'll have the sizes of the taps that I use and the sizes of the drill bits that I used popping up if someone wanted to do that, but I would advise against it unless your valve covers are completely dry, or if you don't have your baffles in your valve covers because they're getting powder coated. Mine are powder coated and they're held on with red Loctite now, red Loctite in 10mm bolts. That makes it a little difficult to get all the shavings out, but since it's dry, I basically banged it around for 10 minutes on my hand, keeping the powder coat in nice condition. And I have the air oil separator that'll be going on the outside of the head, so that doesn't really matter too much as far as I'll still be able to relieve crankcase pressure from up here because of these. It doesn't matter that I don't have my crossover tubes. I wouldn't do this if it was the normal setup. I'm doing it my way. So yeah, so that'll be nice. Also, these are CT200H seats that I'm going to try to make fit into the IS300. I just had to pull the rails off the bottom of my seats and then try to bolt those in, and then look at the motor configurations and see if I can either swap over the IS300 motor assembly completely to these seats or rewire these seats so that they work with the IS300. We'll see. I'm not sure what the easiest thing will be, but I'm going to look at all those options and see what I can figure out and probably make a video on it. Most likely make a video on it in the future. So anyway, yeah, so as far as the sub-harnesses that I've made, the sub-harnesses, I have one for the ignition coils, and that goes down here, and that's these wires. I'm going to terminate those and snake those to the interior to the Haltech whenever I set the engine in the engine bay, because that way I'll know how long these wires need to be. So for right now, it's like 8 feet of wire that's going down on the floor beside those seats. This is one of the other sub harnesses that I've made, the only other one that I've made right now. So this is the one for the injectors, the VVTi solenoid, and my fuel pressure sensor that's over there, into the fuel pressure regulator. It's like just kind of hanging off the side of it there. So I tried to be a little artsy with it when I mounted it. So it's facing in this direction. Now this is susceptible to vibration now because it'll be on the engine vibrating with the engine. So I'm not sure how long this will last, being that it's, on something that's just going to vibrate it and shake it to death. But we'll see. There's a little nipple down here that I can put the one of the vacuum lines on that'll connect to the fuel pressure regulator, and the fuel pulse damper also. There was another little nipple somewhere over here that I could attach the fuel pulse damper to, but I think those two will be fuel pulse damper and fuel pressure regulator. So that's how that's going to be routed. This is a Radium Engineering fuel rail, so I like that it's so compact that I'm able to mount the fuel pulse damper there and the fuel pressure regulator there, which makes it really cool. It also looks fairly compact, especially with this return line that I made. And so this is the return line that's left over from that, and I want to say it's Earl's Performance line with Earl's Performance fittings. I can't read the lettering on the side of it, but I think that's what it is. So yeah, I bent the line up around there, and it's secured to the, I have it mounted in with these little, I forget what they're called, but they're like little mounts that you can secure things with, it's like a little rubber stuff around a metal band that you can bolt into not a metal band, like a hair band, like an 80s band, but you know what I mean, metal band. Not a metal band, but a metal band. So yeah, so I wanted to go from hardline to steel braided line, because this gives the line the ability to just shake around while I'm accelerating and shifting gears and everything. This is 6AN, 8AN is going to be connected up here. I don't like this 90-degree bend that this takes off of the fuel rail, but I kind of have to live with that. This is a nice ground point here. This is for all the coils. It's another example of something that's not tight. So I'm going to take all this off and then bolt it all back in, just so that I have peace of mind, and yeah, and I know that it's all tightened. But yeah, and then oh yeah, so this is going to get its own connection, shielded connection to the Haltech, but my cam position sensor, this is a Haltech, and it's Aerosport Engineering. I want to say that they're the ones that made this. Aerosport Engineering or Autosport Engineering, something like that. But they're the guys that made this little bracket that basically you just fit the Hall effect sensor in. It's cheaper than the bracket that is made by Powerhouse Racing, and it serves the same purpose. Also down here I have their the Hall effect crank sensor. This wire is long enough so when I make the sub harness for the alternator and coolant pressure, coolant temperature that's going to be up here, so these wires can hopefully all go into the same connector. I'm not sure on that yet, but if I have the connector over here, then that connector would hopefully go to the passenger side of the vehicle and then snake down the side back to the firewall and then to the Haltech. So it would get away from the turbo and away from all the engine heat. And the same thing for this sub harness over on this side. That'll be for the AC compressor, because I'm still running AC. The AC compressor, the oil level, I think it's an oil temperature also, but it's both in one. And then this oil pressure. So these are going to be feeding into the gauges that are still controlled by the factory ECU. So these connect to that. My oil pressure sensor is going to be on the oil filter relocation kit. So it's down there. It's got a filtered and an unfiltered option. Also, my oil feed is likely going to come from the filtered side of that and run to the turbo, because since this is a GE block, the oil passageway that's on this side, like I said in a previous video comparing the GE to the GTE block and head and everything, the GE block doesn't have an active oil passageway on this side. So it's unfortunate because I can't tap in here where the factory GTE oil, in that oil galley that comes out, that's like behind this little ball bearing. So I can't connect any of that stuff. So since I'm on the subject of wiring, my new ground point is going to be down here, kind of near the starter, but in the block. So the ground wire that I used to have connected to, I had it connected to the bracket that was supporting the manifold, but I'm gonna have it connected, the ground point bolted straight into the block right there. So nice solid connection. All the sensors and everything get a solid ground, and that'll be going directly to the battery. And I also have a fat ground wire going from the engine block to the chassis. I don't like skipping on ground connections. It's not something that I want to do. And then the only other sub harness I'll need to make is the one for the transmission, the T56. And obviously that'll probably be the last one that I do. I'll have most of the sub harness made and attached to the transmission with probably some extra wire hanging off of it, so that whenever I put the transmission in and everything, I can run the wires up, connect them to where I want them to be terminated, and they're little quick release, quick connectors, and then that's it. So the idea behind the quick connectors is instead of having to disconnect all the fuel injectors and all the ignition coil stuff and all of the sensors and potentially break all those plugs, I can leave it all intact should I need to pull the engine out. So the idea is I just go through, undo all the quick connectors, undo the fuel lines, undo the motor mounts, take off the AC compressor, power steering lines, and the radiator hoses, pull the engine out. Almost that simple, but not quite that simple. I'm just trying to make it as quick to pull out as I can. So if I need to pull the engine out, I can pull the engine out fairly quickly, do whatever I need to do to it, and then put it back in the car. So I'm trying to think ahead as I'm doing all of this, and the quick disconnects, the multiple quick disconnects are definitely going to help out with that. I might have mentioned this before, but I used the 45-degree angled for the oil coming out of the oil filter relocation. So there's that. I tried to bend this up. So my tube bender has been really run through the ringer. So I tried to bend that. Actually, well, I did bend it. I had to put pipes on each side, on each end of the handle, just to have the leverage to bend that thing. But it's slightly too wide for this, so it ended up cracking the edges off of this, which is fine because really I'm not too concerned with that. I could still use this. I'll just kind of tuck it out of the way, but I can use this mount point that's underneath there. I don't know if you can really see it, but there's a mount point that's right there. There used to be a bar that went from the power steering pump over underneath the old intake manifold, and then it bolted where the intake manifold had the support that went down to the block. That bar went across there. I don't need that anymore because I don't have that intake manifold, so I'm probably going to use that mount point to make some little bracket to hold this up and out of the way, so that way it's still at the same angle that it was when the IS300 was all factory. But yeah, so that is gonna be like that. And yeah, so that's gonna be good. And I don't have to spend 100-something bucks on a custom dipstick tube. While I was bending that, I was being very careful, and I was watching how far the dipstick hangs out of the bottom of the tube, and I was making sure that that didn't move even the slightest bit. So it didn't move when I bent it, because I think I put that little bend here, and I think I put a little bend here, but it's just a few slight bends, and the slight bends together gave it that big wide bend so that I can put it up here. This power steering pump, I like how I can still use the factory power steering pump. It's not in the way of, because I'm using the Greddy intake manifold, throttle body here. Speaking of the throttle body, I've ordered it's the Porsche 997 GT3 throttle body. It's an 82 millimeter throttle body, and it has a 77.5 millimeter butterfly on the inside. So I'm using that. Initially, my plan was to use the G35 350Z throttle body along with the Q45 throttle body. So mixing the electronic throttle body with the Q45 throttle body, so gaining the electronic throttle body functionality of the G35, but putting it onto the Q45 throttle body that's just a manual one. I decided against that just since, like, one, this 82 millimeter throttle body is only like 220 bucks, so that's not bad. And the only issue now is just figuring out how I'm going to mount it, which may be buying a $150 mounting bracket to go between the 82 millimeter Bosch throttle body for the 997 GT3, or I could drill and tap the front of the Greddy intake manifold, but I don't really want to do that. I could do it. I have the stuff, but that's an option. Sealing it might be an issue if I do that. So this was cool. So these are the 3 studs. So this is the factory one. That's the dark steel one. So that's the factory one, that's the dark steel one. And the titanium, the burned titanium one. So they're the same length. The one on the left is the Speed Factory, the one in the middle is OEM Toyota. So they're the same length. So these two, if you look and you compare these two side by side, there's 2 ways that you could thread this in. This one, I don't remember specifically what it's for, but I got it off eBay. It's actually from the UK. Titanium stud, bought only as a stud. It didn't come with a stud and nut and everything. I was only able to buy the stud. I think I had the option to buy the nut with it. But I can thread it in this way, and this will go all the way in. The longer side I have coming out of the head. So the shorter side I have inside the head, but it does thread in this way to where this goes all the way down inside the head, and then you have a super short, but the nut didn't grab enough threads whenever I was putting it on this way. And the reason I had to buy 3 of those shorter ones is because these studs under here, if I can get underneath and point up. So this stud I've already swapped out. So I've put that on there, and there's no hex key on the end to remove this. You basically have to use like the 2 nuts that are tightened together to get this out if you want to remove it. But right now you could just spin it in my hand. And I'm gonna gain a couple millimeters because right now this isn't running a gasket. I still have to, when I pull the exhaust manifold off, I've been mocking everything up. I didn't want to put it on, take it off, put it on, take it off. So I'm going to put the gasket between the exhaust manifold whenever I actually finalize it and put it on. Also, since I'm talking about the exhaust manifold, this is going to be cut, and I want to mount my wastegate a little bit further away from the exhaust. Even though this is a water-cooled wastegate, I want to get it away from the exhaust because of just trying to route cooling lines and stuff this close to the exhaust. It's going to be crazy hot, and my exhaust pipe is going to go up here, which makes it difficult for me to run lines. So I'm basically going to cut this, and whenever my friend welds my downpipe for me, this is going to be cut and this is going to go down. So my wastegate and everything would be somewhere down here. Yeah, so that's things that I'm still working on with this, but I figured out the studs. So yeah, like buying these shorter ones ended up being really, really nice. Fuel lines though. So this is a 10-foot fuel line. This one that I got from Earl's Performance. I think it's Earl's Performance. And I've got it laying out beside the car. So I assumed, because the fuel pump is like right there in the car. So I assumed that after I bend up this part of the line, and then I bend this little section forward, the fuel line should go up about right there. So I have that laying there. So it's about 8.5 feet where it goes up here, and then it will curve up, follow the firewall, and I'll have probably 1.5 to 2 feet, maybe slightly longer after the line's bent up, because it's never, you can't measure it and then bend it and expect it to be exact. I'm probably going to lose some based off of what I'm estimating, but this should be 1.5 to 2.5 feet of steel braided line that goes down, that connects to the hard line. And this is 6 AN, this is 8 AN coming off of here. That line's going to be run the same exact way. The problem is that line hasn't come in the mail yet, so I'm still waiting on that. I ordered it like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and I'm still waiting on that line to come in the mail. But when it comes in the mail, I can start working on the lines. I have a triple fuel pump that's also from Autosport Engineering. I still have to assemble that, but it's 2 fuel pumps that'll be in the hangar, not 3. So that's that. Whenever I take the engine off the stand, I'm gonna put the engine in the IS just to set it on the mounts so that I can focus on dressing up the wiring, finishing up the wiring on the compressor, and seeing how the heater hoses line up, because I have HPS radiator hoses and heater hoses. So I have their stuff, and these are the 2 heater hose connections. So it's not that dissimilar from stock. I think the kit that I ordered was made for the BBTI GTE engine, so I shouldn't have any issue connecting the lines, but I want to make sure that I have all the right stuff. So I'll just be setting the engine inside the engine bay, and that will be video log number 7. I'll have probably a lot more cool content by the time that video is put together. And then yeah, whenever I do that, bell housing, mounting the bell housing, measuring for bell housing run out, and then swapping out the pilot bearing with the Mohs Supra one that I ordered, which is for 2JZ to T56 transmission. So it takes the inside of the pilot bearing, it fits the input shaft from the T56, and the outside of the pilot bearing fits into the crank for the 2JZ. So coming over here, you can't see it that well. It doesn't matter that you can't see it that well. It's filthy right now anyway. But this bumper I'm still figuring out. This is a Neo V2. It's gonna take a lot of shaving trying to get this thing to fit, but it's gonna be fun. That's gonna be fun. So whenever I drop the engine in the engine bay, I'll be able to work with all the wiring around here. But this is some of the stuff that's for the brake booster delete, ABS delete. Whenever I put the car down on its wheels and roll it out into the driveway, I'll be able to pressure wash it, pressure wash the engine bay, get that all clean, because I'll be doing a lot of work in here for routing the brake lines to the to this new brake master cylinder. It's a dual piston master cylinder, I want to say, and all the everything that comes along with that. But basically, I've got to clean this engine bay really well before I hop into it. Otherwise, I'm going to get filthy. But that's it with the car. This is everything that I could think of that I wanted to go through and that I wanted to talk about in this video log. And yeah, if you guys liked this content, then please give me a like. It helps out. And if you want to ask questions about why I did something a certain way, please feel free to ask in the comments down below. I'll try to include it in the next video. This is the update on the car and why you haven't seen very many videos on it recently. So thanks a lot for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and God bless you guys.